The red lights flashed across the alien warship as loud alarms rang through every hall and every room and every corner of the ship as crew members shouted to each other and ran to their stations with panic on their faces because something had gone terribly wrong, and everyone knew it, but no one wanted to say it. Out Ludan, the control room, the captain stood with his claws pressed tightly together, his eyes wide as he stared at the screen where the warning flashed again and again in big glowing letters saying containment breached lower deck 17. And the moment he saw it, he whispered a single word to himself, and it was human. The officers around him froze in place and looked at each other, some confused, some afraid, some shaking, because they had only heard stories about humans, and those stories were not kind or peaceful or easy to forget. And now one of those creatures was loose on their ship, and no one knew how. They thought he was weak, they thought he was broken, they thought he had given up because he had not spoken in years, not since he was captured and locked deep inside a cold metal cell so far down the ship that most of the crew forgot he even existed. But he had been waiting, he had been watching, and he had been learning every door, every camera, every routine, every weakness in their system. And he said nothing because silence was his best weapon. When the power flickered for just 3 seconds during a routine engine check, the doors unlocked for less than a breath, and that was all he needed, because in that moment he was gone. And when the lights came back, his cell was empty and the cameras showed nothing but darkness and a broken chain. Now soldiers marched down the long corridors toward Deck 17, holding their rifles and scanning every corner, every shadow, every sound as the ship's lights flickered again and again. Like the ship itself was afraid of what was coming. 10 of them went in strong, fast, ready. They said it was just one creature. Just one man. How dangerous could he be? But the answer came 20 minutes later, when only one soldier came out crawling, covered in blood, and unable to speak, and with eyes so wide and lost that he looked like a ghost. And from that moment, the crew understood the truth. He was not just a man, he was something else, something they could not predict or control or stop. And now he was somewhere on their ship, moving through the vents or the wires or maybe the shadows themselves, and they could not find him no matter how hard they tried. The captain stood over the wounded soldier in the med bay and asked again and again what happened. What did he see? What did the human do? But the soldier only stared ahead and shook his head slowly, and then finally whispered he was smiling. That word made the room go silent, because they all knew what it meant, because smiling was not a sign of peace. Not for humans, not during war, because when a human smiled, it meant the real fight had begun. The captain called a full lockdown and sealed the lower decks and ordered no one to go alone and no one to speak the human's name, because he believed names gave power, and this human already had too much of it. But it was too late, because the stories were already spreading across the ship faster than any order, faster than any control, and the crew began to whisper in corners and wonder in silence. What kind of creature could escape alone and without tools and then hunt the hunters? Like he was born for it. They remembered now the ancient war, the last time humans fought, and how it took 5 empires to stop them, and even then Earth was not destroyed by power, it was destroyed by fear, and now that fear had returned with a single man, and no one knew what he wanted. Some said he was trying to escape, and others said he was trying to reach the engine room, and some even said he wanted revenge for what they did to his people. But no one really knew, because he never spoke and he never showed himself. And still, soldiers kept vanishing and lights kept failing, and the ship began to feel like a trap from which no one could leave. Deep in the ship, the human moved like a shadow, silent, fast, clever, using broken wires and sharp metal pieces like old tools. And sometimes he left messages scratched into walls, short, simple lines like "I remember" or "I am still here," and each one felt like a knife in the minds of those who found them. He never used weapons because he was the weapon, and he never screamed or shouted because silence was his voice, and every moment he stayed alive, the fear inside. The ship grew louder than the alarms and brighter than the red lights. Captain stood in the dark with his officers around him and finally said the words none of them wanted to hear, and his voice shook as he spoke them, and he said, "Do not hunt it. Do not chase it. Do not think it is weak, because that thing that escaped is not just a human. It is the last human, and it is angry, and now it is free, asterisk." The hallway was quiet. Now too quiet, like the ship itself had stopped breathing, like the walls were listening, and the lights above flickered just enough to make every shadow feel alive. 10 soldiers had gone down there wearing full armor, carrying the best weapons the Empire had built, and each one trained for war, but none of that mattered because they never came back except for one, and he was no longer the same. He crawled into the light, shaking, bleeding, whispering sounds that made no sense. And when they tried to help him, he screamed and begged them to turn off the lights, turn off the lights, because he said the human was watching from the brightness, not the dark, and nothing made sense after that. The captain ordered a sweep of the deck every inch, scanned every vent sealed, every door locked, but the human was nowhere, and yet somehow the damage kept growing. The systems failed one by one, security doors opened at random. Power lines melted in perfect patterns. It looked like sabotage, but too smart, too fast, too exact for anything their tech teams could understand. Then came the messages, not through speakers or screens, but scratched into walls, into metal, with something sharp and steady, always in the same style, always in the same hand, no fear, no shaking, just calm and cold and cruel. The first message said 10 went in, 1 came out, next time none. Second message said you locked me in, now I will unlock you. Third message said you built a cage and left the key. Inside panic grew like a sickness, spreading from crew to cruise ship to even the officers. Stopped sleeping, and even the guards looked over their shoulders, and some began to ask the question. None of them dared to say aloud, what if he was never just a prisoner? What if the Empire made a mistake? What if they had caged something they never really understood? They had called him weak. They had called him a relic from the lost world, a creature from a dead species, but he moved to their ship like it was his own body, like he had memorized every corner and every sound, and now they were the ones trapped and hunted and helpless in the lower engine room. 2 soldiers stood guard, one older, one younger, and the younger one asked, do you think he is even real? And the older one said, I saw him once before the war ended. I saw what his kind can do, and if he is here, then the ship is already lost. The younger soldier went quiet and then asked why they even keep him alive. Why not end it? And the older one stared ahead and said because they were afraid of what would happen if they failed. Meanwhile, the human moved without sound through the old service shafts, where light barely reached and dust fell like ash from the vents above, and he carried only a broken pipe in one hand and a sharp wire in the other, both stolen, both simple, but in his hands they were enough. He passed through locked doors like they were paper. He dodged cameras without effort, and he listened to the ship as if it spoke to him, because it did through every hum and every vibration, and he knew what they did not. He knew where the fear lived. He did not kill unless he had no choice, but when he struck, it was fast and silent and clean and always left a message behind a name, a warning, a line of words that made the crew stop breathing. In one hallway, he wrote, do not send children to fight wolves in. Another, he wrote, I do not forget, and I do not forgive them. Something new happened, something. The Empire had never prepared for a crew member left a food pack near a vent and walked away without telling anyone. And later, someone else left a key card outside a storage door, and soon more started to do the same small acts, tiny signs, and it became clear that not everyone feared him. Some were starting to believe in him. Captain found out and ordered immediate execution for traitors, but it was too late because the idea had already spread that maybe this human was not a monster. Maybe he was justice. Maybe he was the voice of all the things the Empire had tried to erase. Whispers moved faster than orders, and some crew began leaving notes in corners, short questions like, are you real? Or what happened to Earth? Or can we help? And none got answers, but none were punished, and somehow the human always knew where to find them inside the officer's mess. A new message appeared carved into the table with perfect lines. It said, I do not want escape. I want truth. The captain stared at the words for a long time, his fists shaking, his eyes cold and filled with old pain. And then he said one thing to the officers around him. Something no one expected. He said we should have destroyed him when we had the chance, but that chance was gone now, and the lights kept flickering, and the shadows kept moving, and the crew knew deep in their hearts that something old had awakened. Not a bomb, not a machinia. A man, a human, and he walked among them now, like a ghost with a mission, and a memory that refused to die. The voice came at night, soft, low, steady. It echoed through every hallway and every room, every speaker and every helmet and every corner of the ship, and it made everyone freeze where they stood because it was a sound no one had heard in years. It was a human voice. No one knew how he did it, how he broke into the ship system without being seen or touched or traced, but there it was deep and slow and calm like the voice of something older than war and colder than space, and all it said at first was one thing: you took everything. The crew looked at each other. Some whispered, some just stared at the ceilings, as if the voice would come again. And it did a few minutes later, this time with more words, this time with more weight. You ended. My world, you erased my people. Now on the last one, and I remember all of it. The captain stormed into the control room, barking orders, shut the comms. Shut the systems, blocked the voice, but nothing worked. The voice was inside, now it was everywhere. And no one could stop it, not even the engineers, not even the machine minds. The humans spoke again this time, telling a story, not a threat, not a warning, just a story. Quiet like a memory spoken out loud. He spoke of Earth before the war of skies, full of stars and cities of light, of oceans that danced, and music that lived in the hearts of children. And he spoke of families and laughter and peace. Then he spoke of fire. He told how the Empire came with promises and lies, how they said humans would be part of the galaxy, how they said peace was their gift and trade was their goal, and then how the fleets came with bombs. Not aid with death, not trade, and how Earth burned and the skies cracked and no help came and no mercy was given. He spoke of betrayal, of screams, of ash, of silence, and when he finished the story, he said one last thing before the comms. Went quiet again. I was there. Some crew cried, some stared at their hands like they had never seen them before, and even the officers stood, still unsure what to say, what to feel, what to do, because the stories they were told were different, full of glory and honor and pride. But this was something else. This was truth. It tasted like rust and regret. The young ones began to ask questions. Why? Did they lie? Was it really war, or is it a slaughter? Did we destroy a world, or just silence a voice? We feared the captain banned the voice, made it illegal to speak of the human, made it treason to listen, made it death to repeat his words. But still, the voice returned each night with more truth, more stories, more memories. He told of last stand, the final city of the moment. The sky turned black and the last child vanished in the flames, and he said that child had a name and it was his name, and from that day on he made a promise, in the ruins of his home I will make him remember. Some of the crew began to believe him, not just fear him, but believe him. Follow him in secret, write his words on walls, hide his messages in vents, and even leave tools and codes where he could find them without a word, without a sound. He had no army, and yet he was building one, not with guns, but with truth, not with fire, but with memory. In the darkest room of the ship, a small screen blinked and flickered, and then showed a symbol not from the Empire, not from any known world. It was the symbol of Earth, long forgotten and lost, and yet here. It was alive and glowing. The human had taken the ship's heart, the old data core, the place no one remembered, the place even the captain thought was broken, and there he built his message. Not a bomb, not a weapon, not a virus, but a simple broadcast. Send it into the stars, across space, into deep channels, into forgotten satellites, and it carried one message repeated in every language, in every voice. I am the last human, and I remember you. Coming planets. Far away began to receive the message, and whispers grew louder across the Empire. Some laughed, some feared, but others began to ask, what happened to Earth? What did we do? What did we lose? The voice on the ship grew silent for 2 days. No messages, no words, no sounds, and the crew thought it was over, but then on the third night, it returned stronger, deeper, filled with quiet rage. He said, this is not revenge, this is not hate, this is not madness, this is truth, and truth does not die. The captain stood alone in the war room, staring at the map of the ship, blinking red at every corner, showing failure, showing shadows, showing something moving through the walls, something they could not catch. He knew what was coming now, not a war, not a battle, reckoning, and it had a voice, and that voice was human, asterisk. It started with one guard walking away from his post, leaving his weapon behind, not running, not hiding, just walking into the shadows, where no cameras could see and where only the human waited. Then another joined him, then 2 engineers, then a medic, and soon it became a pattern too strange to ignore, too quiet to trace, and too fast to stop. And the captain knew something had shifted deep inside the ship, something no rule could control. They were not afraid anymore, not of the truth. They were afraid of what they were becoming, Every story the human told became a fire inside their minds and hearts, and it burned the lies they were raised with, the lessons they were taught, the orders they once followed without question. They had always believed the empire was right because it was strong and because it won, and because it erased anything that said otherwise. But the voice of one man from a dead world was louder than all their victories. He spoke again, this time not from the shadows, but through a broadcast so clear, so full of life, it made even the most loyal officers tremble as they listened. He said, "I do not want to destroy. I want to wake you up." Said, "You follow orders from ghosts and you fight wars. You do not understand, and you wear armor to hide the shame in your eyes." He said, "You are not soldiers. You are prisoners, and the cage is made of silence." And then he said, "I am not your enemy. I am your mirror." The crew began to leave their posts, not with weapons, not with fear, but with questions, written on slips of paper, left on chairs and tables and walls. Why are we here? What did we do to Earth? What did the Empire hide from us? Some officers tried to stop it. They screamed and threatened and punished and locked doors, but every lock failed. Every system broke. Every command met with silence or slow shaking heads. The shift had begun, not with bombs, not with force, but with something older than were it true. The captain stood before the council of command, each one proud and cold and blind, and they demanded answers. They demanded the human be found be ended be erased, and the captain said only one thing: he is already part of the ship. They did not understand what he meant, but he did. He saw it in the eyes of his crew and the hands that once held rifles, now resting empty in the quiet and the silence that felt more alive than sound. He saw it in the drawings of Earth that began to appear on the walls, made with dirt, with blood, with anything people could find: stars, oceans, forests, cities, all from memory, all from the voice that kept speaking. Some said they saw him walking the halls, not a ghost, not a shadow, but a man calm, steady, never hiding, just watching. And the guards looked away, not from fear, but from shame. One day, the lights went out across half the ship, not from damage, not from failure, but by choice. And in that darkness, voices rose, not from speakers, but from the mouths of those who once followed orders. They repeated his words, not with fear, but with hope, not with anger, but with belief. "I am the last humanity remember. Earth I remember. Peace I remember. Fire. And I walk among you, not to punish, but to remind." The captain walked the halls, now alone. No guards, no orders, just silence and symbols drawn in corners. Signs of something rising from deep within, something old, something forgotten. He reached the cell where the human was once kept, where it all began, and found it open, empty but clean, with words scratched into the wall. "You turned me into a prisoner. Now I turn you into people." And beside it, another line, smaller, quieter, almost kind: "I forgive you." That broke him more than anything else. Not the fear, not the war, not the death, the forgiveness, because he knew what they did, and still the human gave them a choice to change. He fell to his knees in that cell and placed his hand on the cold floor, and for the first time in his life, he wept, not as a captain, not as a soldier, but as someone who remembered something better, something lost elsewhere on the ship. People began to talk to each other, not about commands, not about missions, but about Earth, about what they were before, about what they could become again. And in the dark of the engine room, a small light blinked, slowly, steady, waiting, a beacon, a signal. The human had built it to send a call, not for war, not for revenge, but for something else. A new beginning, one man against an empire. And the empire was starting to turn. The message reached the edge of empire space, riding waves of static and dust and lost signals. It passed through dead satellites and old stations, where no one listened anymore until one station did. At first, they thought it was noise, just broken sound, but the words came clear and slow and full of something ancient and real. And it said, "I am the last human, and I remember what you did." The message spread fast, faster than any warning, faster than any ship. It moved through military networks, civilian channels, hidden places where truth was feared, and even more where it was wanted. Some laughed at it, said it was fake, said it was a trick, said the humans were gone, long gone, and could not speak from ashes. But others listened, and they remembered, because some had seen the sky burn long ago when Earth fell, and some had watched without speaking, and some had helped, and now the voice of the last human was calling them out one by one. "Remember the ones who stood by. I remember the ones who looked away. Remember the ones who smiled on one world? A small child heard the voice and asked her father, "What is Earth? And why does this man sound so sad on?" Another world, a worker stopped his task and stared at the sky, as if waiting for something or someone, and whispered the name of the planet he was told never to say again. Earth, the Empire tried to stop the message. They sent ships, they jammed frequencies, they erased records, but it was too late. The voice was already alive in the minds of too many. And silence no longer worked. People started asking questions. The Empire could not answer questions that turned into fire under the surface. Why? Was Earth destroyed? What threat did humans pose? Why were they never given a trial? What gave the Empire the right to end the world? Some officers resigned, some generals vanished, some high leaders claimed they had no part in it, and some begged for the message to stop. But it did not stop because deep in the ship where the human still walked and still whispered, he had found a way to speak to all of them, not just through machines, but through people. The crew of the ship had changed. They no longer followed the captain. They followed the message. They followed the truth. They followed the one voice that never asked for power, only memory. They opened the doors themselves. They showed him the paths. They carried his words and protected them. And when the Empire sent a new order to retake the ship, they ignored it one by one, the ship sent. To stop him, stopped responding. And when they were found, they were not destroyed. They were quiet. They had turned. No shots fired, no blood spilled, only choices. Made to remember, to listen, to believe. The human finally spoke to the Empire itself through the largest broadcast channel in the galaxy, his voice clear, steady, unbroken by fear. He said, "You built your empire on silence, but I am not silent." He said, "You fed on fear, but I do not fear." He said, "I am not a soldier. I am not a leader. I am a witness. And I bring memory." The leaders of the Empire sat in a dark hall full of lights and gold and weapons, and they stared at the screen in front of them where his face finally appeared. One man, one face, one voice, and they trembled because he was not angry. He was not screaming. He was calm, too calm. He said, "You feared what humanity could become now. You see what one human condoned still. I do not bring worry, bring choice. Tell the truth. Let the stars remember, or I will make them remember." And then the screen went dark. And the silence that followed was heavier than war, louder than bombs, deeper than space. The Empire had heard him, and now they had to choose. Some wanted to strike to erase him with force, but others said it was too late, said the people would not follow that path again, not after hearing the voice, not after feeling the guilt, not after remembering Earth, and somewhere in the shadows on the edge of Empire space, in a quiet ship full of flickering lights and whispered voices, the last human sat alone, staring at a small screen showing stars. He did not smile. He did not cry. Waited, because now the galaxy was listening, and it would never be the same. Asterisk. The streets on Empire worlds were quiet for the first time in years, not because of curfews or fear, but because people were listening not to orders, not to leaders, but to the voice of the last human echoing from speakers' walls. Even old radios, left behind long ago, every message carried more than sound. It carried truth, and truth moved like fire through dry grass, and no one could stop it. On some planets, people gathered in silence around screens, watching the old recordings of Earth that had been buried by the Empire, but now brought back by the human. He had hacked the vaults of history and made them open to all they saw: children laughing under blue skies, oceans wide as hope trees, taller than ships, cities alive with lights, not for war, but for joy and peace and music. And they saw the end. They saw the sky turn red, the cities fall. The screams, the fire, the silence. It was not war, it was execution. The Empire said nothing at first, but the silence was louder than lies, and people knew what silence meant now. They had learned from the voice that silence was not peace, it was control. One by one, small rebellions sparked across the stars, not with weapons, but with memory. People refused orders, they threw down banners, they sang the songs of Earth without knowing the words, and still the sound felt true. The human did not tell them to. Rescue simply reminded them of what was lost, and that was enough. On the ship where it all began, the human now walked without fear, without guards, without chains. The crew bowed their heads, not in worship, but in respect, because they had seen what truth looked like, and it wore his face. He spoke only when needed, and when he spoke, the whole galaxy leaned closer. He said, "We were not perfect, we made mistakes, but we loved, we built, we dreamed you. Feared what we might become, but we only wanted to belong you. Gave us death, and now I give you memory." He was not Alone, now across the galaxy, others began to speak humans once hidden. Humans once hunted humans, thought long gone now, stood in the open and said, "We are still here." The Empire tried to stop its scent. Order sent fleets, but many ships never fired, many crews refused, many officers left their posts without a word because they too had seen the message, they too had listened, and they too remembered the fall did not come with explosions, it came with people. Standing still, refusing to move, refusing to fight, refusing to forget, a soldier dropped his rifle and said, "I will not kill for silence," a child wrote. Earth on a wall in chalk, and no one erased. Ida teacher stood before her class and told the real story for the first time and cried as she spoke. Truth had become louder than fear, and fear had lost its power. Leaders of the Empire met again, desperate to find a way to turn the tide, but every idea they had was met with silence from their own people, because their voices no longer mattered. Only one voice mattered now, the voice that remembered. The last human sent one final message to the heart of the Empire, not with anger, not with hate, just with hope and one question: will you choose to lie again, or will you finally listen? And then he waited. The stars seemed to hold their breath, and then something happened no one expected. Empire answered not with weapons, not with commands, with truth. They opened the records, they showed the files. They admitted the lies. They said Earth was not destroyed to save the galaxy, but to control it. They said humanity was not a threat, but a fear of change. They said the silence was not protection, but power, and they apologized not enough, not fully, not for everyone. But it was a beginning, the first honest beginning in a long time. The last human did not reply right away. He stood in silence in the old room, where it all began, and then he spoke softly, without pride, without victory. "Thank you. Now, let us begin again." And across the galaxy, stars felt warmer, skies felt closer, and voices once quiet began to speak. Again, not with hate, not with pain, but with hope, hope born from memory, hope born from truth, hope born from one voice, a human voice. The galaxy did not change in a single day, but something deep had broken, and something deeper had begun to heal, and it all started with a voice. Not shouting, not demanding, just steady and true planets that once served the Empire in silence now spoke. Out loud, they told the stories they were never allowed to tell: stories of fear, stories of shame, stories of hope. Some cried, some raged, some fell to their knees, but none looked away, not anymore, because the truth was now part of them, part of every star, every ship, every whisper in the dark. The last human did not lead armies. He did not sit on a throne. He walked the halls of the same ship, the one where they once caged him, the one that became the spark. He looked tired, older, not from age, but from carrying the weight of a fallen world. And still, he stood still. He moved forward, not for himself, but for those who never got the chance. He visited places where Earth's name was once banned, and now carved in stone. He stood in front of statues, built not to honor him, but to remember those who are lost, those who never had a voice. He spoke only 3 words on each world: "Do not forget, children." Or taught their real history. Now teachers told them about Earth, and about war, and about peace, and about what silence can do if no one speaks against it. The Empire as it was no longer existed. Some leaders vanished, some stepped down, and some stood beside the human and said, "We were wrong, and we will make it right." And he believed them not because they were perfect, but because they chose to change. He watched from the ship as a new satellite rose above a free planet, shaped like a circle, split into 2 sides, one dark, one light, and in the center, a single star, the human star. It was not a weapon, it was not a flag, it was a promise. One day he received a message, not from a leader, not from a soldier, but from a young girl who had been born after the fall. She said, "I want to see Earth one day," he replied with one line. So a team was formed, not to conquer, not to fight, but to find Earth again, to return to the place that had been lost to dust and silence and time. They called it the home mission. The ship was old but strong. The crew was mixed, humans and aliens alike, bound not by orders, but by one hope: to stand on the soil of the lost planet and say, "We're home." He led them not because he had to, but because he wanted to, not for glory, but for memory. The journey was long, filled with ruins and stars and echoes of the past. But one day they saw it, a small blue dot, broken, but still turning, wounded, but still waiting Earth. The landing was slow, careful, silent. No drums, no cheers, only breath held tight, and eyes full of tears. He stepped out, first his feet touching the ground he had not seen. Since he was young and he knelt and picked up a handful of soil and let it run through his fingers. This is where it all began. Others followed, planting seeds. Placing stones, singing songs no one had sung in centuries, and still the planet listened. As if it remembered too, they built a monument, not tall, not grand, just a circle of stone, around a flame that never went out. And they called it the Circle of Return. Every year, people came from across the galaxy to walk around it in silence and memory. In peace, the humans sat beside it, often watching stars rise and fall, never needing more than that, never wanting more than truth. One day he closed his eyes under the earth sky for the last time, not in pain, not in fear, just in rest. He became part of the soil, part of the wind, part of the story, and still his voice lived on in children, learning to speak in songs sung under alien suns and stars named after Earth. The galaxy remembered because one man refused to forget, and from the silence of one became the voice of many, not the end, but the beginning, the first human star.